Good morning, evening. Welcome to week 5 of Mpai 600 here at Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies. Just announcements. As I mentioned, August 10th, I'm going to do a Capitol Hill kind of terrain walk. Still fleshing out the details, but we're going to do it August 10th. Probably start time will be about 6:45. The terrain walk will maybe last an hour or so, and then at 8 o'clock we'll go grab drinks afterward. If you want to attend, please RSVP. If you're not vaccinated, I ask that you go masked. And if you're not vaccinated, I think it might be best that you skip drinks inside on that night. And there's no reason at this point to not get vaccinated. You need to get vaccinated if you want to come on campus anyway in the fall. So that's the August 10th. That's the announcements. Just week 4 review. Iraq Wmdk. So there was failures in collection, as we talked about. The Curveball documentary really highlighted that. There was failures in analysis. There was groupthink, particularly around the aluminum tubes issue that was discussed in detail. Groupthink, confirmation bias, all those aspects of an analytical failures were documented pretty well in the Iraq Wmdk case study. Organizational failures. I would argue that if all your intelligence is filtered through George Tenet or a few people, that is an organizational failure. I'd also add if you're establishing duplicative organizations to tell somebody what you want to hear, that is an organizational failure as well. And the Rachel Maddow documentary talked about that in depth. And then finally, policy interface. This is a classic example where the intelligence may have not been briefed to the policymakers in the appropriate nuance and appropriate detail that it should have been. That everyone just went for the bottom line points, that they didn't cover all the caveats and the issues that wasn't briefed to the policymakers. I don't know if it would have made a difference at the top end with the Bush administration, but certainly at the congressional level, it might have made a difference when briefing the media and the American public. It might have made a difference as well. And then we talked about the 9/11 case study. Was 9/11 an intelligence failure? You saw my documentary in my lecture. I think it was, or I could see how you can classify it as not an intelligence failure. But the fact that we knew there were 2 known hijackers in the United States talking to a known bin Laden safe house, and that information was not disseminated down to appropriate authorities, is probably the critical intel failure. Not even used in the United States. We knew they had visas, and that was that information was collected at the government level, but not disseminated properly. I always ask this: what to do if you get let's say you're briefing the president, as you saw in the National Geographic documentary, what to do when bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S. And the president turns back to you. Let's say you brief that, and the president turns back to you and says, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And are you supposed to just kind of throw your hands up and say, I don't know? And the reason I bring that up is when you're briefing a senior leader, you want to bracket the problem. You don't want to just give these one-piece headlines here and then have him kind of scurrying and say, well, okay, is action needed? Is this something big deal? So just keep that in mind when you're briefing senior leaders. And finally, the organizational issues. As I mentioned, information was at the NSA, collected at the NSA, but because of the box, because of classification issues, because of chains of command, because of other bureaucratic issues, that information wasn't disseminated down. So that's an organizational failure regarding the 9/11 case study. And then, as the National Geographic documentary highlights, where along the chain could the federal state government have prevented a 9/11? And that brings us to our next week's cases, where we're talking about 9/11. Is the fusion centers, better cooperation with state and local officials? Have we gotten to that level where we can defeat terrorism or at least mitigate a 9/11-like event. And when I talk about the chain, the National Geographic documentary lays it out pretty well, where you had sanctuary in Afghanistan, free travel to the United States, free living in the United States. I mean, they could buy leases or get credit cards, rent cars, get leases on apartments with no red flags popping up. They can check into aircraft, buy plane tickets, get flight lessons, charge the aircraft, and conduct a 9/11-like attack. All those things have to have happened without impediment in order for them to be successful. So as we're going through the future case studies, would a potential terrorist group be able to do all those things in that right order to pull off a significant attack? So paper two is due Sunday if you're writing the paper. Paper 2 is due briefing if on Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So just want to re-emphasize this as I emphasized before. If you're briefing, that's groups 1, 2, and 3. You're briefing on Thursday. Group 1 will brief at 9. Group 2 will brief at 9:30. Group 3 will brief at 10. And so you're briefing those. You're doing these. That is a group project. 20 minutes for the briefing, about 10 minutes for questions. PowerPoint presentation. It is a group assignment. You will all be getting the same assignment or the same grade no matter what. If someone can't attend because of time zone or other issues, that's fine. Just make sure that someone is briefing and you've redistributed the workload to account for that. So that's if you're presenting. If you're writing, your paper is due at 11:59 on Sunday, Eastern Standard Time. You see the guidance about 1,200, 1,500 words. If you go over, that's okay. If you go under, that might be an issue. But same assignment about the strategic case studies we talked about. If you're going to deviate from the case studies we talked about, just let me know. Just shoot me an email or something that says, hey, I want to do a case study on XYZ. I'll 99% of the time will approve, but I just want to make sure that you're tracking on that going forward. So paper 2, just some key guidance. Strategic paper, case studies. So on the write-up, it says choose a case study and go in depth. I allow you to do either that or allow you to take an issue like collection failures or analytical failures and show how it was compounded in multiple case studies. So a couple of issues. Again, what I don't want is a laundry list. What I don't want is a laundry list. What I don't want is a laundry list. I said it 3 times just to emphasize my point. I do not want, here are 14 reasons why there was an intelligence failure around Pearl Harbor or the Iraq Wmdk study. I want you to choose 1 or 2 issues in the collection cycle where you think was the primary issue. Show how it cascaded throughout the intelligence cycle and led to the failure. And then finally, what mitigating circumstances could have been implemented? What reasonable mitigating circumstances? I just want to give you an example as well, is that in the Pearl Harbor, a lot of you talked about Pearl Harbor, a lot of you listed indicators in your discussion section and says, hey, they should have known because of X, Y, Z, A, B, C. That's fine in the discussion section. But in the paper, I do not want that laundry list. I want you to tell me what you think maybe the one indicator should have been, how it contributed to the failure, and what could have been done to mitigate the circumstance. I can't emphasize enough. You will not get an A, or you will not get an A or A minus unless you've addressed those points. So talking about potential avenues for the paper, failures in collection. At Pearl Harbor, we talked about the failure to know where the carriers were. The Yom Kippur War, the over-reliance on one human source, Narwan. Iraq War, as I just talked about, the curveball failure. Failures in analysis. The Pearl Harbor case study talked about the groupthink and confirmation bias and being derisive about the Japanese capabilities based on partially on racial prejudice. Those are all failures in analysis. The confession, confirmation bias, negative evidence bias. Those were all prevalent in the confessions case study. Iraq WMD, groupthink, negative evidence. We just talked about confirmation bias. Just talked about that a second ago. Those are all failures in analysis. Failures in politicization. Iraq WMD. I just talked about that a second ago. The confessions, where there was an inordinate amount of pressure to obtain a confession due to politicization or interference. And then 9/11, I just talked about how you brief senior leaders, and was that senior leader tactical enough, or that information tactical enough that it could have been acted on and receptive by the policymakers. And then organization. Again, I just talked about the NSA documentary, how information was at the NSA level, but not briefed down, that it could have made a difference. The Pearl Harbor case study, information was collected at the federal level, but arguably, the commanders didn't know about it, and arguably, if they had, they could have implemented mitigation circumstances. And then the fusion centers, where, and this goes along with the 9/11 case study, information is collected at the higher levels, but is not pushed down the lower levels. Supposedly, the fusion centers are supposed to mitigate that, but you can discuss that in your paper. So I just gave you, again, do not give me a laundry list of all these. I just gave you plenty of examples to use where you can go and compound and extrapolate for your paper going forward. And then unfortunately, because it is a compressed class, I usually give a week off so you can do your paper and structure it and think about it. In this environment, I can't do that. So we go right to week 5, the counterterrorism case studies, Fort Hood, underwear bomber, Boston, European Union. And then we do not bring, regretfully, I do not bring a right-wing extremist case study. I will do that for future ones. But we will do we'll do the Capitol Hill, if you can make it. But we'll also, you could also see some parallels between the jihadist case studies and the right-wing case studies as well. Maybe different people, different looking people, but certainly the same radicalization cycles follow for both. The readings, you have the Fort Hood shooting and the congressional report on the Boston Marathon bombing. The documentary is the Christmas Day bomber, excellent documentary, and then the PBS Frontline on EU terrorism. And the question is, as you're going through all this, is why do we still have these failures? Despite the millions, billions, trillions, depending on how you calculate it, we've spent on counterterrorism, why do these things still happen? So if there's questions or issues, let me know. I look forward to seeing you on Thursday at 9 p.m., Group 1, Group 2 at 9:30, Group 3 at 10. It's optional if you are briefing, it's optional if you're writing a paper, but please have at least, if you're briefing, at least have 1 or 2 representatives that can brief your presentation eloquently. I'll see you then, and I look forward to this week's discussion.